The Byte Show is listener-supported at thebyteshow.com. The Byte Show is sponsored by Deep Cello Coffee, perhaps the best coffee on this or any other planet.
Hello, everybody. This is GeorgeAnn Hughes, and this is The Byte Show. And we're really blessed to have Joseph Farrell with us. And tonight we're going to get into cosmic war. Yeah. And we have some questions to answer. And I wanted to start off with Bettina's questions about a crop circle. And I believe you told me, Joseph, that has something to do with a template.
Sure does.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah. I'm actually in the process of writing a little white paper for my website in the members area on crop circles.
Oh.
So I will try to kind of summarize what I was saying in that paper.
Okay.
And the reason why it's connected to cosmic war is when we were talking in this series previously about the use of electromagnetic interferometry to set up patterns of interference, waves of interference. That pattern of interference often acts as a kind of a template to create a certain kind of action in the target area. Well, when you turn to crop circles, you have a number of signatures that, if you look at them carefully, are commonly associated with precisely this type of electromagnetic interferometry. For example, when you look at some crop circle reports, you often find attached to them the fact that people can actually watched them being made, and as they do so, there are little signatures such as glowing balls, floating around in the neighborhood or region of a crop circle.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have been close enough to hear the actual kind of buzzing static electricity, the crackling and the popping that some people associate with the formation of these things.
Wow.
Yeah, which, to me, I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the actual plants involved, the crops themselves, many times you will find the nodes on these plants, where they're growing, that the nodes themselves are kind of exploded, and that the plants themselves have been folded over in layers that run in mutually opposing directions. In other words, there will be one layer and it's folded down to the ground in one direction, and then right on top of it, another group of plants will be folded down in exactly the opposite direction, and over this goes.
Wow.
So these are very complex phenomena, and all of this suggests to me, if you turn to the work of Lieutenant Colonel Bearden, or for that matter, you don't even need to turn to him. You can turn to some of the reports that I mentioned in my books where you have these glowing balls of plasma, and that's what I think they are, kind of man-made ball lightning, so to speak. These are often associated with electromagnetic phenomena, whether man-made or otherwise. For example, you find these glowing balls of plasma sometimes associated over rock formations prior to earthquakes. So in other words, you're dealing with a signature here that's a phenomenon of electromagnetic stress, number one, and with the explosion of plants, the nodes of plants, it is likely that you're dealing with electromagnetic energy in the radar or microwave range of the frequency. In other words, you're dealing with something beyond the infrared end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Okay? So all of this, the person asking me about crop circles here, all of this, the bottom line for me, GeorgeAnn, is, number one, I think we are looking at the deliberate products of a technology. And it's precisely the type of technology that I've been outlining in the Cosmic War series of talks here on your show.
Yeah.
It's the type of technology that I was writing about, all the way back in the Giza Death Star and through the Cosmic War, to a certain extent, even in the SS Brotherhood of the Bell. It's a similar type of technology in all of these cases that you're dealing with. Now, for me, if I can kind of elaborate on her question a bit, for me, the real crucial point is, all right, if it's man-made, why are they doing it?
Yeah.
Okay. And there the question becomes a little more complex. Like all such things, I think what these power elites that have access to this type of technology, when they do something in public, they're usually doing it for a multitude of reasons. In other words, they're doing one thing and combining several different motivations for doing it. All right? It's kind of like the invasion of Iraq. On the one hand, the bottom line motivation was to get rid of Saddam Hussein. The next level of motivation was to secure oil supplies. And then the next level was to secure American bases, for the projection of military power in the region.
Yeah.
And finally, I think at a very, very deep and covert level, it was to gain access to ancient knowledge, ancient technology, and so on and so forth. So all of these things were combined in one operation. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here with crop circles. I think you're looking at an operation that combines several different motivations. The first of which, I think, at a very basic level, is if they're playing with this kind of microwave interferometry, all right, the basic reason they would be doing this, and doing it in such a complex way, is precisely to learn how, so to speak, to steer the technology, how to control it. Practicing, yeah, it would be like the old test patterns that you used to see on television stations back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
At the beginning or end of the broadcast day, they put up the Indian head or the target or what have you. And that was a way for them to calibrate their equipment.
Yeah.
I think to a certain extent that's possibly what you're looking at here. You're looking at a kind of a calibration exercise. How thoroughly and smoothly can we control this stuff? And obviously, if that's the case, if my assumption here is true, then they've learned to control it to a very fine art. Now, the second level is this. If they're going to publicly display a technology like this, they're not going to do it in such a way that gives away directly the human hands behind it. So they're going to have to disguise it. They're going to use the technology to create a psychological operation.
Yeah.
And it's here, I think, that you have to look at the designs in the cereal, in the crops themselves, because one thing above all stands out with these things. The designs typically resemble one of three things. They either resemble mathematical theorems in pictures. In other words, they're just raw exercises in abstract mathematics, or they resemble hieroglyphical things, ancient Egyptian things, or they sometimes resemble technological things.
Yeah.
And then the third thing, and the most interesting thing, is occasionally you will see themes or pictograms in these crop circles that are straight out of occult literature. And I'm thinking of, for example, of one very famous crop circle that was nothing but a crop circle version of the Sephirot, the tree of life in the Jewish Kabbalah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, the fact that you have those types of things being displayed, to me, means that you're dealing with whoever is making these things is dealing from a basis of knowledge of deep human esoteric tradition. And ipso facto, that, to my mind, rules out any sort of extraterrestrial explanation for them, which many people like to see in crop circles.
Yeah.
I think it's the other way around. Now, all that said, at a final and deepest level of crop circles, I think you do have a bit of an occult agenda going on by the people that have access to this technology, and that they're using this technology to create these images in perhaps the hopes of communicating with higher powers, or in actual communication with them. And in other words, they're using the technology to nakedly, openly perform with drawing these kind of occultic symbols in the cereal to perform ceremonial magic on a very big scale.
Oh wow!
On a planetary scale.
Oh.
Yeah, wow. So, those are the four motivations, I think, that are behind it. But I definitely think the bottom line is that you're dealing with a human technology.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Why am I not surprised?
Well, this crop circles are like so many other things in this field. There's a certain group of people that want to leap, GeorgeAnn, immediately to an extraterrestrial, or for that matter, to a spiritual explanation. And they want to overlook the technological explanation, and they want to overlook the hidden human elite explanation, and that's where I think this is coming from.
Well, I tend to agree with you. I know that we have got beaucoup technology that has not, the public doesn't have a clue. In fact, most of the military doesn't have a clue.
Oh, yes, I would agree with that, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're looking at, if I can borrow Richard Dolan's observation here.
Okay.
I think you're looking at what he would call a manifestation of a breakaway civilization. In other words, a group of people here on Earth that has access to technologies that are so far in advance of anything that the public is aware of, or even people that have a good idea of classified projects. You're looking at something so far in advance of that.
Yeah.
They constitute themselves really a breakaway civilization, a civilization so far in advance of where we're at that the only analog would be us versus a tribe of Amazonian Aborigines.
Yeah.
It would be similar to that. So I agree with you. I think you're looking at a very, very small, narrow group of people with some very powerful technologies.
Wow.
And they may be trying to communicate with, God knows who.
Yeah. Oh, boy. That's kind of scary.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Now we have a question from a gentleman in Scotland.
Oh, boy.
And he says, let me start off by saying that I have thoroughly enjoyed the Nazi International and Babylon Spanksters.
Okay.
And that I find them highly accurate. However, I just recently finished reading The Cosmic War, and I have lingering questions. And he says, both Sumerian and Egyptian civilizations believed that they were legacy civilizations of a higher, more advanced civilization.
Right.
And this, coupled with the Tower of Babel moment, were, as you claim, there was a unified, sophisticated science and language that was splintered. Wouldn't that suggest that there should be more legacy civilizations prior to Sumer in Egypt with even more sophistication than Sumer in Egypt?
Yeah, I see his point, and in a certain sense, I tend to think precisely that way. I think that you do see indicators that there is something that preceded Sumer and Egypt, and for that matter, the Indus Valley and what have you.
Yeah.
But that was not yet that very high civilization in high antiquity. It was, so to speak, the first step of declension from it. All right? Now, in evidence of that, one of the things I think this gentleman may perhaps be missing, GeorgeAnn, is that I tried to fill in that gap a little bit with the book Grid of the Gods.
Yeah.
And in that book, if you look at certain things around the world, they appear to be, at least to my mind, and again, I want to kind of cue everybody in that, you know, I could be dead wrong here. I'm just saying this is the way it looks to my eye right now. I may change my mind. Some other researcher may come along and dig something up in the desert somewhere that proves the assumption wrong. You know, this is just the name of the game.
Yeah.
But with that caveat in mind, if you look at places like Tiwanaku in Bolivia, or not too far away, Pumapunku in Bolivia, you are looking at a phenomenal technology that had to have existed in order to engineer or machine those big stone blocks in all of the absurdly intricate ways.
Oh, yeah.
And to, you know, I mean, yeah, you've seen the pictures.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. They're just, you know, they're just so bizarrely intricate that you can't imagine anyone wanting to build something like that, much less actually setting out to do so. You know, they display a technology and sophistication that we don't have today.
Yeah.
So in other words, you are looking at real archaeological evidence of a civilization that had a science and had a technology that was higher than ours, and they were doing these things for whatever reason. Now, the interesting thing is that with respect to Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, the Inca legends clearly indicate that whatever they were up to there, it was no good. In other words, there again is the implication that they were up to something military.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one area that you have to look at. Again, if you go to Egypt, I talk in Grid of the Gods about a place called Nabta Playa in Egypt, where there is this bizarre, very, very old megalithic structure that displays a cosmological knowledge of things that would have required a technology to know. For example, it clearly gives you an analog not only of the Milky Way galaxy, but of the Milky Way galaxy's satellite galaxy. In other words, if you can think of the Earth with the moon, well, the Milky Way has a satellite too, which is a smaller galaxy called the Sagittarius galaxy.
Okay.
Now, you know, this was not discovered until comparatively recently in modern astronomical history. So in other words, whoever built this thing, again, had a knowledge that shouldn't be there, according to the standard academic line, back prior to, and there's no doubt that whoever built this thing built it prior to standard academic history of Egypt. In other words, you're dealing with something that's pre-Egyptian. So is there evidence for what this man is talking about, a previous civilization prior to Sumer and Egypt and so on, that is dispersed around the globe? Well, there is evidence, although we'd have to say that to a certain extent it's rather threadbare.
Mm-hmm.
But by the same token, if you recall the things I wrote in Grid of the Gods, or if you recall what I put in Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men with respect to some of the ancient sites in Great Britain and France, and how they were carefully laid out according to units of measure that were astronomical and geodetic and accurate.
Yeah.
Well, in other words, you're dealing here with people that had to have had some advanced and sophisticated sort of scientific knowledge. This is the bottom line. So, in response to this gentleman's question, your question is absolutely dead on. It's a very accurate question. It's the right question to ask. And is there evidence of such a thing, an intervening civilization, or at least, if we don't want to call it a civilization, GeorgeAnn, we can at least call it a group of people that's doing all of these building projects for whatever reason. And it's very clear that the knowledge they have is pretty sophisticated. It's completely anachronistic on any standard academic history. And this is why I'm not a subscriber to standard academic histories because they just don't want to go there.
Yeah. Well, he continues. He says, to me, that seems to be the linchpin.
Yes.
For, as you claim in Cosmic War, that the original Sumerian myths were passed down to Egypt and eventually showed up, albeit a bit bastardized, in the Old Testament of the Bible.
Right.
And he says, anyway, something seems missing to me, and I seriously think that if such an advanced interplanetary civilization did exist, then there would be more of a written record. Surely, in any degradation of the original language, there still would have been the written word.
Well, let's stop right there.
Okay.
Here, I think we're making assumptions about what would happen after a cosmic war. If we can imagine, the God perish the thought, but if we were to imagine for a moment an all-out thermonuclear war, all right, it's my suspicion that you'd have very little by way of surviving written records. I mean, our computer records of things would be obliterated.
Oh, yeah.
As for that matter, would paper records.
Yeah.
You would have to find some mechanism whereby to preserve as much human knowledge as quickly as possible over as long a period as possible. And the other thing you'd have to account for would be the inevitable loss of knowledge that would occur after a catastrophe of that sort. In other words, you're going to be facing with the degradation of knowledge over time. So you're going to have to try and figure out a way to preserve knowledge in a semi-permanent form, in spite of the fact that the humans doing the preserving at any given moment may not know completely what it is that they are preserving.
That's true.
You follow me?
Yeah.
So I suspect that the solution would be to find, first of all, a way to memorialize knowledge in terms of mathematics or religion, and to do so on semi-permanent media, such as stone.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think this is precisely what is done. Now, that said, when he mentions the idea of written records, it is not completely true that we do not have written records, because the whole point of looking at texts like the Edfu text that I mentioned in the Cosmic War, or like the Hurrian texts, or like the Mahabharata, or the Ramayana, or the Lugal-A, any of these ancient epics that I talk about in that book. The whole point of looking at them is that while these things appear to be horribly garbled memories of something, they are nevertheless memories that for whatever reason were written down after the event, and how long after the event we cannot say. And the other assumption we have to be very, very careful about, and it's an implicit assumption that you will discover in his question, and it's one that scholars of ancient texts make all the time, and that is that the document equals the text. So in other words, the assumption is this text emerges with this particular cuneiform tablet and no earlier. But you see, that's an assumption that we're making about the document as opposed to the text. Those texts, in fact, do give you the very strong impression that they have been recorded. So in other words, we may be looking at a text whose records date back much farther than we know. We only have the actual record of them dating back so far, but the text contained on that cuneiform tablet may be older than the cuneiform tablet itself.
Oh, yeah.
You see, there's a logical assumption that people always make here that may or may not be true. So I don't think it's a requirement that you have to say there would be other records. And we may eventually find records like that. And let me give you an illustration of a case in point. And that, of course, is the famous example of Friedrich Delitzsch, whom you and I...
Oh, yes. I love that guy.
You and I have talked about before, you know.
Yes.
Because in his day, of course, the assumption on the part of biblical scholars and, you know, theologians alike was that the books of the Bible, the books of Moses, were the oldest record of the appearance of the name Yahweh.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, that is sort of a cardinal implicit assumption within Christian dogmatics. All right. Well, Friedrich Delitzsch, of course, being Friedrich Delitzsch, decides that he was going to go out to Mesopotamia, and lo and behold, he digs up some cuneiform tablets.
Oh, bless his heart.
that have the name Yahweh clearly inscribed on them. And the problem is, of course, and they had been unknown prior to that point.
Yeah.
And the problem is, of course, that the texts are, you know, even by conservative biblical scholarship dating, the cuneiform tablets he dug up were about 1,000 years older.
Yeah.
You know? So Moses isn't even a gleam in his great-great-great-grandfather's eye yet.
Yeah.
So, you know, this caused a bit of a firestorm, and you know the rest of the story. The Kaiser summoned him to give a lecture behind closed doors to his court, and, you know, there was a big blow-up in the Lutheran Church in Germany and pretty much everywhere else in Europe. But, you know, we have to be careful about saying there would be surviving records. One, we don't know that. And number two, we may discover records that show up. And number three, we must never make the assumption, and this is the key point here, we must never ever make the assumption, dealing with these ancient texts, that the document and the text itself are the same thing. They're not. This is the key assumption that people have to get through their heads.
Oh, wow. Okay. He says, it seems highly implausible that an advanced civilization like the one you propose, who encoded sophisticated information and knowledge on the tablets of destiny, would immediately degrade and lose its written language. Sorry for the complex question, but when I finished reading Cosmic War, I was left with these ideas floating around in my head.
Oh, they're perfectly legitimate ideas. I mean, you know, I had the same ideas when I finished writing the book. the real problem that we have to remember here is, number one, he's targeting the tablets of destinies that I talked about at great length in the Cosmic War. And the real problem is, first of all, that he has to remember what those texts themselves say about the tablets of destinies. They were used by parties in that war to wreak untold destruction.
Yeah.
So that when they were recovered by the victorious party in that war, some of them were destroyed, some of them were put to use in other things or in other ways, and some of them, a very few of them, which could not be destroyed, were hidden.
Oh.
Now, the really interesting thing, and I think I kind of hinted at this in the book, and have stated this on, I think, in our own series much, much earlier, years back there when we first started this series.
Yeah.
The other thing is I think it is possible that these things weren't even hidden on this planet.
Oh.
So, in other words, we may have, in our space explorations, have bumped into these things. Would anyone have revealed it if we did? Probably not.
Yeah.
The other problem here is we have to be very careful, like I said before, from making the identification of text with document.
Mm-hmm.
Just because a text does not exist on a cuneiform tablet prior to such and such a date does not mean that the text itself did not date prior to that cuneiform tablet. It just means we don't have any extant examples of it.
Yeah.
So, when we're dealing with textual traditions that themselves say, hey, look, we're very old and we're legacies of something else, I think we need to take that seriously. So,
well, like books that are written, you'll see in some of them 8 or 10 different copyrights.
Yes, that's quite so.
Yeah.
That's quite so.
Yeah.
And, we don't really know how many copyrights went into these books. I'm not trying to dodge, I'm not trying to dodge the point here. He does have a very legitimate point. But I think he's looking at too narrow a selection of evidence that, we do have sites around the world that do appear to be older than Sumer, older than Egypt, older than the Indus Valley, and yet younger than the civilization I'm writing about in that book by far. And that these sites do exhibit a sophistication of knowledge and a sophistication of technology. So we have to deal with the evidence that we do have available. And where you have technology like that, ipso facto, you would have to have some sort of sophisticated language, most likely some sort of records, but we just haven't found them yet. Or the other possibility is, and I'm very serious about tossing this out there, the other possibility is we have found it.
Oh.
And it's been suppressed.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And I make that suggestion very strongly in Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I know I've asked this question before in the Cosmic War series, but I'll ask you again for the sake of the listeners. Is the Sumerian language older than the Hebrew? Yeah.
Sumerian, all of those languages are basically from the same family of languages, but the Hebrew language isn't as old, at least as far as I know. I'm certainly not a Semitic language specialist by any stretch of the imagination, but as far as I know, yes, Sumerian is older. Sumerian is a strange language in that when you study it, you kind of have to reverse engineer the language. In other words, you approach the language through the lenses of Akkadian and Assyrian, and kind of reverse engineer it, so to speak. That's about the best way of putting it. And, you get a glimpse of that because the cuneograms for Sumerian are very, very different than the cuneograms that we're used to looking at when we look at those clay tablets.
Yeah.
Sumerian cuneograms are much simpler in their appearance, and really, in a certain sense, they don't even resemble the later cuneograms of Akkadian or Assyrian at all.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, Joseph, there was some talk about they were going to destroy the pyramid.
Yes.
What was that all about?
Oh boy, GeorgeAnn, at the basic level, that was just nutty fundamentalist radical Islam.
Oh dear.
Once again, deciding that it can, in the name of its book God, deciding that it can ruin monuments of human culture and history because it conflicts with its stupid system. At the most basic level, that's it.
I'll bet Zowie Hawass.
Oh, I can imagine he was just, you can't blame him.
Yeah.
The idea of doing so is so ludicrous. But the problem here is, how in the name of sense are you going to destroy the Great Pyramid and the Pyramid of Sefrin? I mean, these are colossally huge structures.
Yeah.
And a little plastic explosive just ain't going to do the job.
That's right.
In other words, you would be talking about either so much conventional explosive to destroy those structures, or quite literally a tactical nuke, and probably not even a tactical nuke would do the job.
Well, don't they realize that they make money from tourists?
Yeah, I don't think that, I certainly hope that those structures aren't in any real fundamental danger.
Me too.
For a number of reasons, but I think that they are such priceless artifacts of human culture and history, and we still, to this day, I mean, the Great Pyramid has been studied now for centuries.
Yes.
And with each refinement and progression of human technology, the mystery of that structure only deepens because, as our technology and science advances, so does the amount of science and technology apparently embedded in that structure appear, So, it's like I pointed out in the Giza Death Star trilogy. The more we look at this thing, the more our science advances, the more we realize that all of those numbers that are embedded in that structure are there deliberately. Even to the point, in my opinion, and again, I could be wrong, but even to the point, in my opinion, that it embodies numerical relationships of some of the coefficients of constants in quantum mechanics.
Wow.
Quantum mechanics, let's be blunt here, that doesn't come along until Max Planck in the early 20th century.
Yes.
So what's it doing in the pyramid? So,
Well, wasn't it the Islamists that stripped the white cover that was on the Great Pyramid?
the casing stones on the Great Pyramid and the casing stones on the Pyramid of Sefrin there were, yes, when the Muslims invaded Egypt and took it away from the East Roman Empire, over time they stripped off the white polished limestone from those pyramids and used them to build mosques in Cairo. So, there was already a certain amount of defacing that was done. But you can imagine what those structures would have looked like with white polished limestone sticking up in the desert during the height of, a hot desert summer day. They would have been very, very luminous, very bright. Hardly the utmost in radar stealth technology. They would have painted a very big optical and infrared signature.
Wow. Oh, Joseph. My goodness. Well, I had sent you some news articles.
Uh-huh.
Hold on, let me find it here.
That, by the way, that reminds me of a little announcement, a thank you I wanted to make to people.
Yes.
While you're looking for those. And that is, to thank people again for the donations and memberships. But I also wanted to, in addition to that dear lady and that gentleman that have helped out so much, I also want to thank all those people that have been sending me news articles and items. That has really been helpful to me for any number of points of view, but simply to, number one, it helps me to know what people are interested in, what they're seeing, what they're finding, the dots they're connecting, and it's extremely helpful to me when people send me things like that. I wish I had time to thank everybody individually. I just don't anymore. I'm dealing with anywhere from 400 to 1,000 emails a day, so I'm just, in one sense, I'm worn out, but in another, looking at all the materials that people send me, there's just so much information out there, and I wish I had time to share it all with everybody, but I wanted to make sure and at least thank people generally for doing that.
Well, and I want to thank people that have helped contribute to my computer fund. Thank you very much, because it couldn't be possible without your help.
Well,
and
we need to keep you on the air, that's for sure.
Yeah. Joseph, there was this was in an email to you, Death Star-esque laser to solve power crisis. How?
I think that was a reference to that someone, and I vaguely recall that. I think that was a reference to a laser that is being used in a controlled fusion experiment. And this particular laser has a power output, the highest power output of any laser yet devised. It's I think either in the giga or terawatt range. It's just a phenomenal amount of power that this thing puts out, and solely for the purposes of getting deuterium and tritium atoms to fuse. But GeorgeAnn, that whole subject of fusion power, it's very complex because, I certainly want to see some form of alternative energy to the system that we have now.
Oh, yes.
Because the system we have now, where the oil resources are, they're sitting on a religious powder keg.
Oh, yeah.
So, it stands to reason that, if you want a peaceful way out of the world's problems, that fusion power would be the way to go. The problem I have with fusion is the same problem many others have, in that the big money research in fusion has always been on huge tokamak Wiggler magnets, on gigantic lasers to ignite tiny little pellets of deuterium and tritium, and so on and so forth. In other words, we've spent billions, literally spent billions of dollars on these approaches, and we are still nowhere nearer having any sort of practical fusion power than we were 50 years ago. Yet, here comes the curveball. When we turn to the phenomenon of lattice-assisted nuclear reactions, or to give it the popular term, cold fusion, little to no money has been lavished on it, officially. And yet, if you look at Dr. Rossi over there in Italy, he's run that device now, I think, in excess of 900 hours.
Oh, my.
Yeah, and is producing power. And it is at least a good sign that cold fusion has now made it into the respectable halls of academia. I mean, my word, MIT is now sponsoring conferences on the subject, whereas it was leading the charge against Pons and Fleischmann 30 years ago.
Oh, yes.
You know?
I remember.
Oh, yeah. Now, here's the even deeper curveball. If you go back to the Nazi International and read very carefully what Dr. Ronald Richter was saying way back in 1951, what he was essentially talking about, when you strip away all the technical language, was, hey, I'm achieving fusion reactions at much less heat than standard academic theory would allow. In other words, he was talking about cold fusion.
Yeah.
He was talking about plasmas and electrical stress, and he was even going so far as to talk about cellular structure in the plasma being a mechanism of transduction of the zero-point energy. In other words, you know, to strip away the verbosity again. He was talking about a lattice structure assisting nuclear reactions, which is the official name of cold fusion.
Oh, wow.
In 1951.
Oh, boy.
And let's remember something else. He said that he had first observed this phenomenon in experiments he performed in Nazi Germany in the year 1936.
Oh, my gosh.
So, in other words, GeorgeAnn, I think when you look at it from that perspective, I think you can make at least an arguable case that there is something going on in the field of plasma physics, in the field of thermonuclear physics, that is deeply suppressed.
Well, they want to keep us all tied up to their grid.
Well, that's problem number one.
Yeah.
That's problem number one.
That's problem number two.
Well, problem number two is, recall what I began Grid of the Gods with, and that was all of those hydrogen bomb tests, very early hydrogen bomb tests in the 1950s, including the one called Castle Bravo, which had a pre-test calculated yield of between 5 and 8 megatons, all right? But when they fired it off, it ran away to about 15 megatons, nearly double the pre-test calculated yield. In other words, oops. You know, now, folks, to make an oops like that, you know, a mere 5 to 8 megatons, you know, is like the difference between a really big bang and a really, 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 really big bang. You know?
Oh my gosh!
You know, and the explanation that the military gave, GeorgeAnn, was, of course, well, you know, when we fired this thing off, we neglected to take into our pre-calculated yield equations the fact that lithium-7, which constituted 60% of the fuel, well, we just didn't even think that would fuse at all. In other words, we are being asked to believe that in 1954, American thermonuclear engineers didn't know anything about thermonuclear chemistry.
Oh gosh!
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's kind of the thermonuclear version of the magic bullets. You know? It takes you know, real great big brass ones, GeorgeAnn, to put that one out there as an explanation, and then hopefully people will buy it.
Yeah.
Now the reason that it is, to me, just an incredibly huge lie is because guess what?
Oh, I'm afraid to guess.
Well, good old, you know, I wrote about it in Grid of the Gods. Good old Dr. Richter down there in Argentina.
Oh, boy.
Said that he was getting fusion reactions out of lithium-7.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And Dr. Balcero, the Argentine nuclear physicist that had been appointed by Perón to go examine this project, he does not make any mention of difficulty with the idea that lithium-7 can be a part of a fusion reaction. He has difficulty with the heat at which Richter claimed to be doing this. So in other words, lithium-7 reactions are, like it or not, pretty common currency and well known to nuclear physicists fully 3 years before American engineers set off that hydrogen bomb.
Wow.
And therefore the explanation that they're giving us is pure 100% unadulterated balderdash.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, they do that to us with a lot of things.
Oh, of course they do. Of course they do.
And, I maintain that there's no excuse for anybody to have to pay for electricity.
Well, again, Mother Nature sends electricity down every day. From the sun, the Schumann cavity resonance, lightning. I mean, it's there all the time. There's a lot of suppression going on in science, and I think this is one huge area that is being suppressed. And again, I think part of the problem here is we can point fingers at the elites, but I go back to something I've said over and over in this series. If you weaponize this physics, it's much easier to do, and you get a lot more bang for the buck than building puny little atomic bombs, which are very hard to engineer, much less hydrogen bombs, which are even harder to engineer.
Yeah.
This stuff is relatively easy.
Oh, gosh.
Pretty much anybody with a little bit of money and a little bit of chemistry and a little bit of electrical knowledge can do it.
Oh, dear, don't tempt me.
Well, the problem is, you see, I think that the powers that be figured out that this stuff, if it's weaponized, would be a proliferation nightmare, such as, we can't imagine. And the other problem that spells is that it would completely transform human culture and completely transform geopolitics. So the real problem they have is, all right, this stuff is out there. We know we can do this. The question is, how do we get from the world that we're in now to that one without blowing ourselves up?
Yeah. Well, we may blow ourselves up anyway.
Anyway, yeah.
Gee.
With this current crop of idiots in charge in London and D.C., they've even, I wrote a blog, GeorgeAnn, since we're talking about this subject. I wrote a blog just this last week on my website, and the title of it is something to the effect that Zbigniew Brzezinski hiccups and has a sane moment. Because if you've been watching what Brzezinski has been saying lately, even he is balking at some of the moves of the Western elites now.
Oh, so is Putin.
Yeah, well, Putin is no surprise.
Yeah.
Zbigniew Brzezinski is a surprise.
Oh, boy. Well, Joseph, I'm furious at this country do you realize that we all live in a country that sponsors terrorism?
Well, it is, I commented on that, since we're talking cosmic war and geopolitics and so on. I commented about that yesterday, or earlier today, in my News and Views from the Nefarium. To me, it is extremely interesting that when China goes to an African country, it basically presents that country with a no-strings attached deal.
Yeah.
We want to give you this amount of money to build infrastructure for this pipeline so that we can use your oil and keep our economy going. So in other words, China's going to these countries, and it is not playing the International Monetary Fund game.
Yeah.
They are undercutting the West's ability to negotiate with these countries.
Oh.
And in response, they're building up infrastructure and so on and so forth. They're trying to do some good. I don't care if they're communist or not. They're at least trying to do some good.
Yeah.
Now, Putin similarly has been calling out the West in very strong language. He began in 2007, and he's been doing it ever since, for reneging on its post-Soviet Union collapse promises that it would not expand NATO into Eastern Europe and into the former Soviet republics, which the West has done. In other words, we basically broke our agreements unilaterally that we made with post-Soviet Russia.
Well, guess what? Russia is refurbing all their old bases.
Well, yes, I know this.
Including the one in Cuba.
Yes, I know this. I know this. In fact, I have a blog coming out about that too. This was the point I was getting to. Was that the response of this reckless race that the West has pursued to encircle these countries and to dictate to them via control of energy supplies and so on and so forth is now backfiring in a major way. Mm-hmm. Because Russia is responding with military moves, number one, that there's really nothing we can do about it. Mm. And China is playing some very, very hard-hitting negotiation games with the third world. So, oddly enough, during this age of transition and geopolitical realignment, and this was the real point I was getting to, what do you see happening? What you see happening is that it is precisely the West that is increasingly turning to military and police state repression measures. Whereas it is now Russian TV that you look at, and you have to be wondering and scratching your head, did I just fall like Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass?
Yeah.
Because it's now Russian TV that's commenting with great concern and sympathy. And, it's genuine as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
About the erosion of civil liberties and freedoms in the United States. Mm. Now, just turn the dial back here, folks, about 30 years.
Yeah.
And remember what Radio Moscow was like back then.
Oh, yes.
Compared to, or for that matter, Russian TV, compared to what it is now.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
You see what's happening?
Oh, yeah.
The West is becoming its own worst enemy.
Oh, absolutely.
We demonized a system for so long that that's what they are in the process of becoming. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying, I hope people are not getting me wrong, I'm not saying that Hu Jintao or Vladimir Putin are not authoritarians. They are. Mm-hmm. They are. But, by the same token, they're not Mao Zedong.
Right.
They're not Joseph Stalin.
Right.
They're not even Deng Xiaoping or Leonid Brezhnev.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. It's an interesting phenomenon for me to watch because, I just scheduled a blog today. I hope people will go on the website and look at it when it comes out. I just scheduled a blog today about the fact that if you look at Western attempts to demonize this geopolitical realignment that's taking place, there's an article that I blog about that complains about the rise of this new authoritarian axis, meaning this new Russia-Chinese thing.
Yeah.
And the problem is, GeorgeAnn, what they are forgetting, very blatantly forgetting, is the fact that this realignment includes India.
Oh, yeah.
In spite of all the bad blood between India and China.
Yeah.
It includes Brazil. So in other words, the world's largest democracy is not, playing completely to the tune of the United States, although we're working very hard at making them do so.
Yeah.
So, in other words, I think if we're not careful, if the Russians and Chinese are smart, and they are, if they're smart, they're going to keep playing the game as they've been playing it, and they are going to increasingly open up their societies and increasingly make these kinds of deals with third world nations while the West becomes increasingly oppressive, trying to hold on to this last bastion of oligarchical power.
Yeah.
I mean, GeorgeAnn, I read this article and I was nauseated because it was literally an attempt to demonize those two countries and point out their human rights abuses, and there are.
Oh yeah.
But let's be honest here. Can we honestly look at the track record of this country and its support of regimes like Salvador Allende?
Oh, yeah.
Or Alfred Stroessner?
Yeah.
Or, what's his name down in Nicaragua?
Yeah.
That was prior to Daniel Ortega and the Contras. Can we look at our track record, or for that matter, Ferdinand Marcos?
Yeah.
Can we look at our track record of support for dictators? Saddam Hussein.
Oh, yeah.
Can we look at our track record of support for some of these dictators and say that our human rights track record around the world is all that good?
No, of course not.
No, that's the point. It's hypocritical, number one.
Yeah.
And it is nothing, and this is the cold hard reality of what's really going on. It is nothing but geopolitics.
Oh, yeah.
And the bottom line of Anglo-American geopolitics for the last 150 to 200 years has been to prevent any Asian power from arising that would be powerful enough, uncontestably, to control that resource-rich region of the world that is the Eurasian heartland. That is ultimately what is behind the so-called financial crisis in Europe. It is a geopolitical game that is being played out in Europe in the guise of a financial crisis. And the goal of the game is to keep Germany from breaking from the European Union. Because if Germany breaks, the European Union falls apart.
Yeah.
The post-war tapestry of alliances that the United States carefully crafted after World War II falls apart. And Germany becomes yet another major nation to become part of that Russo-Chinese Eurasian bloc. That's it, pure and simple. It's geopolitics.
Yeah, well, I look at all this austerity crap, and Joseph, all that is a Ponzi scheme to,
Well, of course it is. This was tried in the post-Soviet era in Russia under Yeltsin. All right, and this is the reason that you have Putin, because we forget, we tend to think that the Western oligarchs are all powerful. They're not. They're dealing with oligarchies in other countries too.
Yeah.
And those oligarchs are every bit as old and entrenched and experienced as they are in the West, particularly in China. I mean, my word, folks, if you knew what you're really dealing with in China, you're not dealing so much with a bunch of peasants called the People's Communist Party of China.
Right.
You're dealing with something much, much older and much more practiced and sophisticated in terms of its understanding of economics and trade and so on and so forth.
Agreed.
It boggles the imagination, really, when you get right down to it. But when the West was attempting, quite literally, to rape Russia in the aftermath of the Soviet collapse, it was inevitable that you would spark a nationalist reaction coming out of the KGB, just exactly like Vladimir Putin did. It was an inevitability. The Russians are simply, we've got to get this through our heads, and even Zbigniew Brzezinski he's been intimating in his recent articles that the current course is much too reckless, is much too fast, and you're playing with fire.
Yeah.
Russia's just not going to sit by and be dictated to. Period.
Right. That's true.
The last two times people have tried to dictate to Russia didn't end up too good,
That's right.
So, I'm thinking of a little Austrian corporal and a little French corporal here.
Didn't work out well.
Didn't work out too well for either one of them.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I watched on RT they had something on today about Hillary Clinton going to Africa.
Yes.
And the commentator came on and just lambasted her visit.
Right.
You know.
Well, let's be very clear about what's going on in Africa. You have another resource-rich region of the world.
Yes, and we've got troops down there.
We've got troops and bases. In other words, Africa has been plundered, as we all know, for centuries under the colonial system.
Yes.
Now, after World War II, and particularly with the withdrawal of the French from French Northwest Africa, you really had the beginning of the end of the colonial period. And the Soviets, of course, attempted to step into the area, but they didn't succeed because, replacing the IMF with goose-stepping Russians isn't exactly going to win the hearts and minds of the population. The Chinese, on the other hand, have gone into Africa. People have to understand, they've gone into Africa very much in the same sort of spirit that President Kennedy's Peace Corps did.
Yeah.
The big difference being that it's not a bunch of Chinese volunteers doing little ad hoc projects in this village or that village. This is a major commitment of the Chinese government with major financial backing. And the whole point of it is to build up these countries, secure them as allies, and have access to the utilization of their resources. And as a result of this kind of approach, the Chinese have been able to beat out the IMF time and time again in Africa. So what's our response been? Well, the response of the United States has been, under President George Bush, to establish AFRICOM, the African Command, and to send more troops.
They listen to the Byte show.
I know they listen to the Byte show. And I hope they wake up and realize that the way that we're playing the game now against Russia and China, we are going to lose.
Yes.
Because we are not playing the human rights game. We are attempting to play that, but when we do it, what do? We end up putting in a dictator in Georgia by the name of Saakashvili.
Yeah.
We end up putting in a stooge, a Soros stooge, in the Ukraine. So in other words, you can play the human rights game, but if you put into power a stooge or an oligarch or a dictator who is worse than the ones you just kicked out, it's not going to serve you too well.
That's right.
And this is the problem. People are seeing through even these so-called human rights spontaneous revolutions and uprisings, the Orange Revolution, the Saffron Revolution, all of these stupid, silly covert ops that Washington has been running. Mm-hmm. Even that's transparent.
Oh, yeah.
So, we'd better get our act in gear and do so fast. Because, the military game cannot be played forever.
Boy, that's for sure.
It cannot be played. We're overextended already.
I heard on RT they reported that we have now a little over 1,000 bases around the world. Yeah.
GeorgeAnn, right now, I think it's between the year 2008 2009. The United States spent more on defense than the next 45 nations in the world put together.
Oh, my God.
That means, folks, Russia, China, Germany, India, France, the United Kingdom, Brazil, basically every other nation that has a significant military that you can think of, the next 45 nations, sum all of their military expenditures together, and they still do not equal what this country alone is spending.
Oh.
Now,
that's breathtaking.
That means, folks, and incidentally, that little statistic comes out of a book by a wonderful researcher by the name of F. William Engdahl, and the book is called Full Spectrum Dominance. It's a book I recommend people read. Now, that means, folks, that you are dealing with in my opinion, a group of people within the corridors of power, certainly not all of them in our government or its agencies, but you're dealing with a group of people with an outlook on the world that says it will not be safe for us unless we can completely and totally dominate it.
Oh, my God.
Now, folks, we haven't seen thinking like that since the days of Joseph Goebbels and Joachim von Ribbentrop, Adolf Hitler and Hermann Goering. I'm sorry. When you have a military machine that out of proportion to the supposed threat, then you can no longer justify that amount of military spending on simple terrorism. That has become the witchery, the spell, the incantation that is used to justify what is really a program of military domination. That's all it is.
Well, the only terrorists that I see are in Washington. You know, these crazy laws they make.
That's my point. You're dealing with a group of people, an oligarchy, and I've said this before on your show, GeorgeAnn. You're dealing with an oligarchy that has overreacted in the aftermath of 9/11, seized it as the opportunity for a breathtaking expansion of American power and an attempt literally to dominate the world unipolarly. All right?
Well, I'll tell you.
This is why, let me finish,
Okay.
This is why you have the reaction of Russia and China and other nations that you do.
Yeah.
And as I said before, they realize that they overreacted, and now they realize my reading, GeorgeAnn, is that they realize that they have set into motion a long-term realignment that is going to go against them. It's already happening. In other words, they had their study groups, their policy groups, and they met and they said, oops, we miscalculated, and 20 to 30 years down the line, we're looking at a massive geopolitical realignment, and we better shore up the defenses while we can.
Oh, boy.
That's what they're doing. That's, I said it before. They have now pissed off so much of the world against them that they are now shoring up the last bastion of power that they have, which is Europe and North America.
Well, earlier this evening I talked with Barry Chamish.
Yeah.
And, Israel came up and Netanyahu wanting to bomb Iran. And Barry said, that's for public consumption. He said if they even tried to do anything like that, Israel would be leveled in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
It would. The real game here, let's forget about Iran and Israel and Saudi Arabia and Syria and all that. The real game that's being played right now is being played between the so-called BRICS nations, Russia and China, to a lesser extent Brazil, India. Is being played between those nations and the West, and particularly between the United States and Great Britain. The rest of the West, if you watch the signals coming out of Germany and France right now, they're odd, because they realize that they're caught in the middle, and that the financial crisis in Europe is really nothing but a mechanism of geopolitics to maintain the European Union firmly under the thumb of that that oligarchical Anglo-American Western elite. It remains to be seen whether they're going to be successful in doing that. I suspect for a while they may be.
Well, my God, Joseph, the other night there were over 1 million Spaniards in the streets.
Yes.
Even the police were charging at each other.
Well, can you blame them?
The police on the side of the protesters against the thug police.
Well, can you blame them? Can you blame them? Because what is really being asked of these countries with such a long and sophisticated culture is to collateralize that culture to the banks.
Yeah.
All right? Now, I'm not excusing for a moment the spendthrift ways of their governments, but by my word, if we're going to point fingers at spendthrift governments in those countries, then the biggest finger needs to be pointed at Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Again, if you are dealing with a defense budget that exceeds the next 45 nations put together, we're talking about the potential military threat that China poses. China's defense spending is approximately 1/6 to 1/7 of the United States.
Yeah.
So, if we're going to demonize people, we better start close to home. We are living in a transitional age unlike any other, and we are living in a society that shows all the kinds of rot and corruption.
Oh yes.
That you saw with the Republic of Venice during the 15 and 1600s.
Yeah.
And I use that very advisedly, and the reason why is because as its power began very imperceptibly at first and then with gathering momentum began to decline, that financial oligarchy in that now no longer existent country decided that it had to clamp down at home and beef up defenses abroad.
Mm-hmm.
So what did they do? They created just as the same as what we've done. They created a star chamber called the Council of Ten that could hear denunciations anonymously from anyone against anyone else.
Oh.
Trials were held in secret.
Yeah.
They had the power of bills of capital attainder and could summarily execute someone in a secret trial.
Yeah.
Now, does that sound familiar?
Oh, yes.
So we're dealing with the same thing all over again. We have to wake up and start having a cultural dialogue. And we've got to get out of our heads that everybody in the government is evil and corrupt and so on and so forth. This is not the case. It never is the case.
Right.
We have to take a long, serious look at our history, at our institutions, our policies. We are creating enemies right and left. Do we really want to have the Chinese for our enemies?
No.
Or do we want them for our friends? Do we want the Russians for our enemies? Or do we want them for our friends? Well, if the answer is the latter, then what do we need to do to ensure that? Can you ensure friendship by coercing them?
No.
Hardly.
And you can't kill the dream of freedom in people's hearts through the use of force.
No, of course not. Of course not. It hasn't ever worked. It won't work now.
Right.
So, we really have to start having a discussion. If it is true, if all of these nutcases, these insane, power-mad, cackling, giggling nutcases like Hillary Clinton can sit around and write books about it takes a village and all the wonders of globalism and all of this happy, bovinus excretus that they like to write about, then why then can we not have, since we have the tools of the Internet now, can we not have a truly global discussion about the age of cultural transition that we're in? It's affecting everybody. It's affecting the Russians. It's affecting the Chinese. It's affecting the Japanese, the Indians, the Brazilians, the Europeans, we better start having it soon.
Joseph, we put embargoes on Iranian oil to Japan and other countries. And Japan said, screw you.
Yes, exactly. You see, this again, we have, in the last 3 years, there have been some things being done in Japan and to Japan on the part of Western leaders that boggle my mind.
Absolutely.
Again, turn back the clock. We want to, the geopolitical game plan that the West has right now is to dominate the energy reserves of that region of the world in Central Eurasia, right?
Yeah.
And thereby to have a lever or mechanism of power, a hold over the Chinese, all right? Well, folks, the last time that the West tried to deal with an Asian power by turning off the oil spigot was in 1940 and 41, and the nation that they tried it with was Japan.
Oh, dear.
Okay. And we all remember a little thing called World War II that resulted from that. Okay.
Well, I think it was pretty cool that Japan told them to go pound dirt.
Well, that's what they told us back in 1941, too, didn't they?
Yes.
So, this time around, it's not just the Japanese that we're saying this to, it's also the Chinese that we're saying this to. At least back then, the Chinese and the Japanese were fighting each other. Do you really want to pursue this insane geopolitics now and get both of those countries mad at you?
No.
I mean, tell me how this makes geopolitical or even military sense.
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
Lunacy.
It's total lunacy. Absolutely. Total lunacy.
Absolutely.
Like I said, you can't dream up a geopolitical fantasy this ridiculous or this lunatic without turning back the clock and looking at the likes of Joachim von Ribbentrop and Joseph Goebbels and Adolf Hitler. You literally have to go to those idiots to find something this breathtakingly stupid.
It is breathtakingly stupid.
Well, you're dealing with people, when even Zbigniew Brzezinski, GeorgeAnn, comes out and says that, we better take a second look at what we're doing. Because, we seem to be pissing off a whole lot of people here. Well, Zbigniew, you wrote the textbook on it. And now you're advocating caution. Well, at least you woke up. GeorgeAnn, it's just goofiness. What these people are, what they've said, what they've written, what they have advocated.
But the thing is, too, Joseph, they are causing the deaths.
I know.
Thousands and thousands of people.
And it's needless.
Yes.
It's needless.
Oh.
And that's the real crime of it. It's not Russia that is sponsoring the covert operations behind the Arab Spring.
That's right.
I mean, stop and think, people. It's not Vladimir Putin doing this, folks. It's not Vladimir Putin behind the famines and all of that in Darfur. It's not him.
Oh, we've sent troops into Somalia now too.
I know.
Oh,
it's they've got to have their empire. Now, I mentioned Venice.
Yes.
Let's turn back. I've just completed the sequel to Babylon's Banksters.
Oh, I can't wait till it comes out.
Well, it has a lot to do with Venice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's turn back the clock and remember the last time we saw a financial elite that had a very narrow basis of power, but had a global reach and extent and intelligence network and global trading mechanism. All right?
Yeah.
Well, that was Venice. All right? I mean, they had spies all the way over into Mongolia in the Khan's court,
Oh,
I mean, you talk about ambition here.
Wow.
It makes poor Adolf and Goebbels look kind of like kindergarten pikers.
Oh my gosh.
At least they had Germany to play with.
Yeah.
Not just a little city, but anyway, the really interesting thing about Venice, and Webster Tarpley's pointed this out time and again, other historians, Julian Norwich, they've pointed this out too. Venice, at one point, the oligarchs in Venice managed to piss off so many people in Europe. At a certain point, everybody had just basically had it. Okay. So at a certain point, with the machinations, of course, of the papacy in the background, you had basically all of Europe deciding that we're going to get together, we're going to form an alliance against Venice.
Good.
It was everybody from France to the Holy Roman Empire to the Kingdom of Naples, to the Papal States. Everybody in Europe was mad at these people, and they went after them. That was really the first general European war, and it was caused by people just, in the final analysis, getting fed up with it and turning against them. And it was only through some very careful, very, duplicitous diplomacy that they managed to survive. Well, my point in raising the historical example is that the oligarchs of the West have managed to do the same thing.
So, yeah.
They are losing friends right and left. Their playbook is known. They have used their central banks and international monetary funds in the third world over and over and over, and raped and pillaged and sent troops in to do more of that same. You can only do that so long.
Well, Joseph, like a commentator about Spain the other night, I mean, I cried. He said people that a year ago had jobs and homes and food, that now they're homeless, sitting in the street.
And there's no rhyme or reason for it.
Right.
There's no rhyme or reason for it.
Right.
The toxic debt that these bankers have caused should be put on the heads of the bankers.
Yes.
Not on the heads of the people. This idea, the idea that you go to a nation like Italy or go to a nation like Spain and tell them that, okay, we're only going to float your debt and give you these Eurobonds if you pledge your gold reserves and national treasures as collateral. Now, imagine presenting that to Spanish politicians in Madrid and saying, okay, basically we want the Prado Museum as collateral. We want all those paintings of Velázquez in the Prado.
Oh my God.
As collateral. Well, you can imagine what the reaction is going to be, and of course, do you blame the Spanish for reacting as they do? No, I certainly don't.
Right.
It's just,
they were even throwing flower pots off their balconies at the police.
Well, like I say, all of this, the real ultimate game here, I think, GeorgeAnn, isn't even financial, it's geopolitical.
Yeah.
The game is to hold together the European Union, keep it in the orbit of the West.
Putting it on the backs of the people. And
putting it on the backs of the people, and especially keeping Germany in it.
Yeah.
If Germany goes, it falls apart.
Well,
no ifs, ands, or buts.
I think Germany's going to bow out.
Well, the Germans are no different than the Italians or the Spanish or the Greeks. They're just on the other side of the equation.
Yeah.
Why should they have to bail out other countries?
Right.
Do you blame them? No.
And the Germans are really angry.
Well, of course they are.
Yeah.
Let's remember our history here, folks. Again, the Germans have been just as much subject to the manipulations of these financial oligarchs as any other country.
Yeah.
And much more tragically, obviously, given the aftermath of the First World War and then what happened afterward.
Right.
So, the playbook's getting old, and it's getting pretty dog-eared, and This is
and
why
predictable.
It's totally predictable, and basically everything anymore that happens, you can see the hands of these people in it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the reason I think you're seeing the great geopolitical realignment, and the reason why ultimately you see, particularly the Russian media,
yes,
becoming very, very sophisticated and tapping into. This is the key point here. I want people to take away from this comment about this realignment. When you see Russia tapping into this growing pool of cynicism within Western populations and speaking directly and unabashedly to the trampling of human rights and freedoms that have been traditional in those countries, as RTTV has been doing.
And if you people out there listening don't have RTTV, you're missing a lot.
You're missing a lot because they're giving a take and perspective on the news in the world and in this country that we used to get in this country.
Yeah.
And it's coming, this is my real point. For Russian TV to be tapping into this growing pool means that they have done some very long-term objective analysis in Moscow.
Oh, yes.
Let's not forget Mr. Putin is a former KGB officer.
Yeah.
Just as was President George Herbert Walker Bush, that helped start all of this down the road in the West. So in other words, you're dealing with people, leadership now, in both cases, that are working off of long-term geopolitical analysis. And in my opinion, what the Russian media is attempting to do on the international stage is to tap into that well of growing dissatisfaction in the West and speak directly to it. They are, and it's coldly, let's be very honest and blunt here, it's coldly calculated and cynical.
Yeah.
They want to position themselves to speak for that. Now that ought to tell you how bad it is. Because no one in the West is doing that.
Right. Well, I understand that you can't get RTTV on Dish. I mean on
the satellite.
Well, I get it on Dish TV.
Right. Well, I get it through the internet.
Yeah.
But the real point people need to understand here is I'm not trying to tout the objectivity of RTTV. It is more objective than the Western media, but it's a calculated objectivity.
Oh, yeah.
Because they have analyzed the situation in the West and realized that the cynicism and dissatisfaction of people means that they don't really have a genuine outlet or voice that is speaking directly to their concerns.
Right.
And they are. They've decided to step in and do precisely that.
Boy, and they do a good job.
And that's the real point here. They do not just a good job, they do a professional job of it. And this ought to give people pause. Because when you compare the other great state-operated media that we do have in the West, public broadcasting or public radio or the BBC in Great Britain, and compare what RTTV is doing to what those networks are doing, you see truly how wide and huge the gulf is. Or compare the political commentary on RTTV to what you get on CNN or Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly, and you'll see the immediate difference.
Oh, yes. Absolutely, Joseph.
The shallowness of the major Western media outlets compared to and the tiptoeing around and the dancing around what's really going on compared to what they're doing on RTTV is phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
Again, GeorgeAnn, I'm sitting here, I was raised just as patriotic as everybody else, and the very idea that you would turn to Russian media sources to get any sort of information about what's going on in the West was just unheard of.
Yeah.
You knew they were liars.
Yeah.
But now the the situation has changed so drastically that we know our own politicians and media outlets are liars.
Oh, yeah. That's a fact.
So we're going elsewhere, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, you know, it's an amazing time we're in. It's a huge era of transition, and you know, it's not. We'll all probably be stone cold dead before the era of transition is over. But you know, at least we can try and do something to make sure it's right. We don't want to. We don't want to see this current delicate situation just get out of hand by a bunch of insane people.
Yeah, that's true.
And let's be honest, there's insane people in Tehran, there's insane people in Tel Aviv, there's nutty people in Berlin and Paris and London and Moscow, but there are some hopeful signs of sanity, too.
Well, since the Earth is doing so bad, I'm going to take you to the moon.
Oh, jeez. Okay. Okay. I didn't expect that one.
Joseph, I've heard that the moon can ring like a bell. Is that true?
Well, it's a figure of speech that scientists, predominantly American scientists, used to describe the kind of seismic reaction that they were getting in seismic experiments that were conducted during the Apollo period and more recently. Because the moon, the seismic waves in the moon tend to behave in a very peculiar fashion, a very different fashion than they would on Earth. For one thing, they tend to last much longer. In other words, you know, if you thump a tabletop, you know, the wave is not going to stick around for a long time. It's a thump, and then it's pretty much gone.
Right.
If, on the other hand, you strike a bell, it's going to ring for a while.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's kind of the way. That's what they mean by the moon ringing like a bell. A seismic wave in the moon lasts an inordinately long amount of time compared to a wave in the Earth.
Well,
it rings, in other words.
Is the moon hollow?
No, not hollow in the sense that most people think, like a tennis ball.
Yeah.
But hollow in the sense that the interior of the moon is of less dense material than its mantle, than its outer crust. Follow me?
Yeah.
In other words, it's, in a certain sense, it's the opposite of what scientists think the Earth is. You have a very dense, molten, heavy core in the Earth, and as you progress towards through the outer core and then the mantle and then the crust, you get progressively lighter and lighter and less pressure. Well, they think the moon, for some reason, is kind of the opposite in terms of its structure. That's basically what they mean by it. Now, that said, you know, I don't have any problem with there being caverns and caves and so on and so forth in the moon, just like on Earth, but hollow in the sense that a lot of people tend to think of like a tennis ball, no.
Do you think that the moon is an artificial satellite in that it was a product of construction?
Well, let me put it this way. We've discussed this before. The moon, where it is, doing what it's doing, just doesn't make any physics sense from a natural point of view.
Okay.
All right. In other words, the naturalistic models of how the moon got there, whether it fissioned off from the Earth at some point in primordial history, or whether it was a wandering celestial object that came by and got captured by the Earth's gravity, you know, there's all sorts of naturalistic explanations, and none of them can really explain why it's there in this very bizarre orbit. Because, you know, the bottom line is when an object enters the gravitational well of a more massive object, and as it does this, it will accelerate, all right?
Okay.
And if it's captured in an orbit, because of that acceleration, the orbit will be elliptical. Just think of a big bowling ball on a trampoline, and you kind of shoot a golf ball close to the bowling ball. What happens? Well, if the golf ball is caught by the bowling ball, it will spin around the bowling ball in a wide elliptical orbit, right?
Yeah.
And as it approaches the bowling ball, it'll go faster, and as it moves away from the bowling ball, it'll go slower, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody knows it, simple physics. Well, the problem is the moon is not in an elliptical orbit. So if it was captured, to make it do what it's doing, you'd literally have to slow it down.
Oh my goodness.
You'd literally, you see what I'm saying? You'd have to park it there, okay?
Oh boy.
Oh boy, that's, it's just basic physics here.
Well,
and if you stop and think about the physics of the moon a little bit more, you'll realize how very, very peculiar it is to be where it is, doing what it's doing. And the reason why is look at the moons of the other planets in the solar system.
Yeah.
Compared to the planets that they are satellites of, those other moons in the solar system are very small compared to their parent planet. Our moon, on the other hand, is, compared to the Earth, gymongous.
Yeah.
The moons of Mars are just tiny little rocks. The moons of the gas giants, are percentages, mere percentages of the mass of the planets that they orbit.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Earth's moon compared to the Earth itself, the moon is huge.
Yeah.
It's way out of proportion of all the other moons. So that makes the physics of the capture model even more difficult.
Oh.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So the more you look at it, the more difficult it is to imagine a natural process for it to get there. Now, once you've said that, then you have to entertain, well, then did somebody build it? Well, I'm not willing to go to that extreme, but I am willing at least to entertain the idea that the physics of it just doesn't make sense on any naturalistic model, at least to me.
Wow. Huh. Oh boy.
Yeah, I was a real pain in the you-know-what when I was a kid in elementary school science class when they were trying to tell me how the moon got there. I remember one of my science teachers, Miss Closterbore was her name, and she just would say, "Joseph, put your hand down. I know what you're going to ask." It just never made any sense to me. And the older I got, when I started reading people like Isaac Asimov and some of those people, and realizing that, hey, there's some pretty serious scientists out here that that are entertaining similar difficulties. I felt a little better about it.
Oh, bless your heart.
Is the moon itself an artificial thing? I don't know. There's actually a book out by some people called "Who Built the Moon?"
Yeah.
That actually maintain the hypothesis that it's some sort of artificial object. I don't have any difficulty, really. If you're willing to entertain the idea that somebody parked a big 2,000-mile wide rock off the planet Earth in a nearly perfectly circular orbit, such that, you can only see 60% of the surface of that planet at any one time, and it's always the same surface, even though that planet is rotating.
Yeah.
When you do all of that, it kind of becomes obvious to me that, the idea of all of this happening merely by chance, that just kind of stretches my imagination a little too far. So.
Yeah. Well, there's things on the moon.
Yes, there are.
And there's things on Mars.
Yes, there are. So
somebody at some time had some pretty wild technology.
Sure. There's I'm not disputing that. And never have. and by the same token, I'm not going to more recent extreme claims of certain well-known names in the field about the moon, but we'll talk about that perhaps after we get done with the show. But
oh dear, that's cruel. The audience will be biting their nails.
Well, the point is, you don't have to always go to those sources for pictures of strange things on the moon. There are other people putting out pictures of strange things on the moon, okay?
Yeah.
And you really don't even have to look that far on NASA's own website to find pictures of strange things on the moon. But, I think that there's a strong case that there's artificial things on the surface of the moon.
Well, isn't it possible that one of these primordial civilizations had a base there?
Well, that's my whole point in the cosmic war, is if we look at the most likely places for a civilization in the solar system that was genuinely interplanetary, where would they be? Well, obviously Earth, but they're also going to be on other planets that would at that time appear to have been capable of sustaining life. So Mars, and then the satellites of the gas giants, Jupiter and Saturn. You're going to look at places like that have obvious capability of some sort to sustain life. Would they base themselves on the moon? Sure. If it's here, why not? It's a logical place to keep an eye on things down here.
Yeah.
It's the high ground. From a military standpoint, it's the high ground dominating the Earth. So it gives you a position of a militarily advantageous position. So sure, yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh, Joseph. Well, my next question. DARPA has...
Oh, boy. Jeez. Okay.
It has a flame gun.
Yes.
That quells fire.
Right.
They
have other things, too.
Oh, yeah. Lots of toys, yes. But this fire-quelling gun, they do it with sound.
Yes.
Now, why couldn't some of these forest fires be put out with something like that?
Good question. The simple answer is, let's assume for the moment you had a satellite up there in space, or you had a sound weapon like that mounted on a large aircraft.
Yeah.
If you were to use that weapon to put out a forest fire, what you'd really be doing is signaling to a bunch of other countries, hey, we've got this really cool toy.
Oh, dear.
In other words, you may not want to let out the secret that you have this toy. All right? So what you do is you keep a potential enemy guessing just as to the extent that you've scaled the weapon up, number one, and number two, perfected the technology. So you let out the fact that, yeah, we've got this technology here. It's kind of cute, see what we can do with it. We can put out this little fire on a match.
Yeah.
When you do that, you're signaling to a potential enemy, think Russia and China here, hey, look, we've got this technology, we're kind of working on this. Well, the inevitable thing that the enemy's got to be thinking immediately is, well, how big have they made this and how far have they taken it? And if they've done that, where have they put it?
Oh, dear.
You see, this can always be, you may not have the technology sized up or scaled up at all, but you can certainly play the psychological operation to make people think you have.
Yeah.
There's a similar thing that DARPA came out and announced that, actually Russian TV once again announced for DARPA.
Oh dear.
that they had perfected a plasma laser, all right?
Yeah.
Now what this is you can take a laser beam and use it to slice a column through the air, and you charge that column electrically. such that you can then shoot a burst or a pulse of a plasma down through that laser beam and have it arise at a target. In other words, you can, to kind of draw a very loose analogy here, remember what a plasma is. It's a ball of hot gas, just like the sun. It's plasma, when you set off a hydrogen bomb for that brief moment when you have that dome of fire that will eventually form into a mushroom cloud. Well, that's nothing but a plasma.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you're kind of firing a little mini sun as a ball of plasma down this column that has been shot through the air by a laser beam.
Wouldn't that look something like lightning?
Sure.
Well,
you know what else? But hang on.
Okay.
Guess what else it would look like?
What?
Remember the movie Independence Day?
Oh, yes.
Remember what they did? They parked their big flying saucers over buildings.
Yeah.
And what did they do? They shot a big, huge laser at the building, charged that laser up, and then pulsed it with, guess what? A plasma.
Oh.
You see? So in other words,
they
again,
could be starting all these forest fires.
Well, my real point here is they are coming up with the technologies. What Hollywood is portraying in some of these films is really accurate. They're coming up with all of these weapons that, the real question that we have to ask ourselves is, are they doing this simply for ballistic missile defense? Could these weapons be scaled up to become strategic offensive weapons? And the answer to that question is potentially yes.
Oh, my God.
So there you have, when you say that nuclear weapons might be as obsolete as the dodo bird, well, there's your potential answer. The potential exists in these two technologies alone for that possibility.
Mm.
So, the game is going to change yet again. And let's remember, what Dr. Rosen has maintained about what Werner von Braun told her, that one of the things that they will use as an excuse to weaponize space is asteroids.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now, how are you going to blast apart asteroids? To use a conventional nuclear or thermonuclear bomb, they're going to have to be very big, and you're going to have to target them very carefully and precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've targeted them, if you miss, you can't shoot it again. You can't shoot the rocket again.
Yeah.
So in other words, optimally, you want a weapon that's kind of like a revolver that you can shoot several times until you hit the target.
Yeah.
And destroy it. So in other words, optimally, you want a directed energy weapon, not a missile with a bomb.
Yeah.
So in other words, these types of technologies look to me to be the types of things that you would naturally look at if you're an agency like DARPA that's concerned with planetary defense against roving asteroids, so on and so forth. But of course, if you can blow up an asteroid, if you can blow up a big space rock with some of these things, oh goody goody, just imagine what you can do if you turn it to the surface of the Earth.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Oh.
So yeah, we're also at the cusp of GeorgeAnn, of a completely different era, not only culturally, but in terms of weaponry.
Oh, dear.
To see how big the cultural change is, just stop and remember that cannon and rockets are at least 1,000 years old.
Oh, yeah.
And we've been using, the same military technology, more or less, with upgrades, of course, all along the way.
Yeah.
But the same basic idea, more or less, for the last 1,000 years. We haven't seen this big of a change in military technology since gunpowder and cannon replaced catapults and rocks.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
You see, that's what I'm trying to get at here. When we start talking about offensive directed energy weaponry, we are talking about a similar huge change.
Yes.
That cannon and gunpowder and rockets have introduced over the last 1,000 years or so. So yeah, I fully expect that by the end of this century, you and I won't be around to see it, but I fully expect by the end of this century, if we haven't blown ourselves up with our hydrogen bombs and ballistic missiles, that they will be as obsolete as the dodo bird.
Yes.
And I suspect, quite honestly, that they're already headed well along the way toward obsolescence.
Yeah, well, that's why I say nuclear weapons are obsolete. They're antique.
Well, I wouldn't say obsolete, but I do think that somebody right here on planet Earth has their hands on some very, very sophisticated directed energy weaponry.
Oh, yeah.
There's little doubt in my mind that this is the case.
Oh, Joseph.
It may not necessarily be, however, who we think it is.
Yeah. Well, the terrible heat and destruction of the crops.
Yes.
That can be manufactured also.
Oh, sure.
And I think that is one of the things that's going on, is that they are doing this intentionally.
Well, yes and no. Way back when we first talked about this subject in the Cosmic War, we did talk about technologies of weather modification.
Right.
Now, the problem here that people have to remember is that weather systems are complex, integrated networks of open systems. Right?
Yeah.
So in other words, you cannot modify the weather in one place and not expect to have an effect on the weather in another place.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with these systems are they are so complex that no one really knows what the effect elsewhere is going to be over the long term. So let's say that Russia, for example, which is one of these nations that I think most definitely has the capability of weather manipulation and modification. Let's say that Russia is creating drought over the United States.
Yeah.
Well, by doing so, they could be creating reactions within the system, within the feedback loops of all these systems, that will play out in weather systems in Asia in a way that are not advantageous to Russia. They could be creating droughts there or floods there, what have you.
Oh, there's
so in other words,
some floods in Russia.
Well, my point here is that when you modify weather in one location, you can get blowback that you're not anticipating in another.
Oh, yeah.
This is the problem. So for that reason, I have to be a little skeptical that they might be using these types of systems. Don't get me wrong, I certainly think they exist, but I have to be a little skeptical that they would be using them on anything like a wide scale. They might be testing it out to see what sort of results they get, but the more they test, the more they learn.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you're going to see widespread use of it just yet. I don't think they've perfected these things to that degree. So, but again, that's an educated guess. Who knows?
Well, like these terrible, huge sandstorms in Arizona, I know that they know how to raise and lower particles.
Sure.
And I think that's what's going on. They're experimenting.
It could be. And I don't rule out that scenario. I don't rule out that what is going on now could be huge sorts of covert warfare, shooting war between various nations that have access to this technology.
Well, look what a lot of ruined crops from heat will produce. Higher food prices,
right.
Less food,
right.
And that's part of what they want.
Well, maybe so. It depends on who they are. You see, we have to get away in the alternative community from throwing terms around loosey-goosey.
Well,
but who are the they?
The U.S.
So the U.S. is doing this, but the problem here is other countries and groups have this technology.
Yeah.
So you cannot point simply to the American elite as being behind this. This is the problem. And frankly, I would doubt very much that they would be taking aim at their own population base during a time of geopolitical upheaval and realignment that we were discussing previously, because the only thing you're doing by doing so is undercutting your own power base. That is a huge no-no. I don't think, therefore, that you can point your finger and say that they are the U.S. If there's a they behind the current American weather situation, I would say it's going to be overseas, and it's not going to be the Western elite behind it. It's going to be someone else. And that there is a covert war, shooting war, going on between these people that have access to these technologies. And the problem is, in using such technologies, does the opponent that you're using it against have a technology to be able to detect the use? What is the good of fighting a war and using such a technology if you're sending a message that the other party can't even receive?
Good point.
So that's the other question we have to ask. And again, I think probably that Russia and the United States, at least, probably Germany, probably Japan, at least have not only the technologies, but the technologies of detection. But the other problem is they're not going to let people know that they have either technology. So in other words, anything being fought as a war in this case is going to be a war between elites.
Yeah.
And the common people won't even know that there's a war taking place.
Yeah.
This is another point that we need to understand about this age of cultural transition that we're in.
Yeah.
We could be in the middle of a war and not even know it.
Yeah.
Because we're the victims of tornadoes or floods or droughts or hurricanes or what have you, or earthquakes or tsunamis. We could literally be unwary of the fact that there is a real honest-to-goodness war going on right around us, right now.
Yeah. And
the war is being fought in a series of moves and messages between elites with extremely powerful technology, and we don't even know it. This is the other thing that we need.
Frightening.
It's frightening, and I'm mentioning it because I'm trying to wake people up with all these books, GeorgeAnn, so that they realize that we need to start having a real discussion then at the popular, broad-based level of, okay, if these things are possible, then what other signatures or footprints might we look for? If we don't have the access to the technology to detect such things, what other things might we look for in order to at least give some collaboration or corroboration, to the hypothesis that we're looking at products or events that are technologically induced.
Yeah.
The weather patterns are strange. Admittedly, they're very strange. This is not global warming we're looking at.
Right.
And maybe it's not even the cyclical occurrences of droughts and wet periods that we're looking at. It has a peculiar feel to it. I mean, I went outside in the sun today and I thought, this heat feels different.
Yes, it does.
It feels like there's more microwave and ultraviolet than is normal or usual.
Yes.
All right? And even the ability to feel that way is different, Everything is changing. So, this era of cultural transition that we're in is being technologically driven. It's touching all aspects of our lives, and we have to wake up, number one, and consider all these possibilities, and then figure out how do we live in such a world? How do we analyze in such a world? How do we interpret events in such a world? These are huge questions, and nobody really is at a popular level having this discussion.
Right.
And it's hugely important, you know. And forgive me, I didn't mean to come down and seem mean or anything when you use the word they and then referred it to the U.S. All I'm trying to get to here is that we need to understand that the United States and its elite are not the only elites that have a technological capability like this.
Yeah.
And they are not the only ones that are insane enough to use it.
Yeah.
In fact, I think right now they would be stupid to use it. Because there are other nations that do know about this capability and probably have the means to detect it, and I don't think that they would sit idly by and let others use it willy-nilly. In fact, I'll be very blunt. I don't think any nation-state in the current world that has access to this technology would be insane enough to use it. That's not to say that I don't think that there are groups of people that have it and that would use it. I just don't think necessarily that they represent a nation-state in the conventional sense. Yeah. There's another player on the block, or players, you know, and that's the other part that I think we have to entertain. So there's so much going on, GeorgeAnn, and it's all part of this big cosmic war. It's all part of this big cultural change. And we've never in human history ever been through a magnitude of change like this.
Right.
Ever. The only time in human history that we've been through anything remotely similar is that cosmic war itself, if indeed it happened.
Wow.
That's the only time we've been through something this massive that has driven this much change outside of an actual war. This is huge, and the other thing we have to remember is that in all such periods, oligarchies tend, on the one hand, both to lose control of the situation, because they're confronted with something new. And oligarchies are oligarchies; they think inside a box constantly. They can't think of anything new. I mean, that's why they're oligarchies. They think inside of a box, but at the same time, they try to analyze the situation so that they can gain some measure of control and influence over it. Well, everybody's doing this now. Everybody's analyzing this situation. So we have to join in that analysis. Otherwise, it's only going to be the oligarchs in Beijing and Moscow and London and Berlin and Washington, D.C. doing it. And we don't want that.
Absolutely, Joseph.
We need to be a part of the conversation.
Well, they don't want us to be.
It doesn't matter. We need to talk anyway.
Yeah.
We need to talk anyway.
That's exactly true.
If they don't want to invite us to their Bilderberg meetings, well, then let's crash the meetings or have our own.
We can have our own.
We can have our own. The point here is we need to start having the discussions.
Yes. Well, oh boy, this has been some.
Yeah, it's been a huge night.
Yeah.
In terms of topics, boy, I didn't expect Moon or DARPA or. So, thank you for the good questions.
Oh, thank you, Joseph, for the time.
Thank you for having me back, sweetie.
Oh, thank you for being here, for answering all these questions, for putting up with me.
Well, vice versa. It's not really that I'm answering questions. We're putting out points to discuss.
Yes.
And your show is one of the few venues that there are really to do this sort of thing. So, thank you, GeorgeAnn, because we need to keep your show and the shows like it on and going. We certainly can't let the MSNBCs and CNNs and RTTVs and Al Jazeera's and all these people control the conversation. We just can't afford it.
Right. Do you know that the Byte Show has its own YouTube channel?
I know that, and I saw that, and congratulations, because there's a lot of audience there. I think that you're going to tap into there that wouldn't ordinarily have known about it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, GeorgeAnn, because people email me all the time saying, "Oh, I just found your interviews on the Byte Show," and and I know the amount of bandwidth that you have to carry and support because you get a lot of hits.
Yeah.
But still, you stop and think about all the people in the world.
Oh, yeah.
And the amount of people that actually listen to shows like this. We've still got a long way to go.
Yes, we do.
So,
yes, we do. And
keep at it, dear. You're a fighter and a trooper in all of this.
In a month's time, and it varies.
Yeah.
I'll have anywhere from 5,000 to 50,000 downloads of audio files, and it does take a lot of bandwidth.
Well, that's why I hope everybody out there will support you with some donations, because I can't imagine. Truly, GeorgeAnn, I can't imagine what it must cost. I really can't.
Well,
with that amount of downloads.
Well, I thank you,
Well,
Joseph,
thank you, sweetie, for having me back on. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
And always fun questions, always unpredictable.
Yeah.
You're in rare form tonight.
The moon, I'm going to take you
It's the moon. I'm going to take you to the moon.
To the moon, Alice.
It's to the moon, Alice. I was just thinking the honeymooners and Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
You're going to the moon, Joseph. Oh, my. I didn't know I looked like Audrey Meadows. Oh, jeez.
Well, anyway, God bless every person out there that's listening.
Here.
And we hope you enjoyed this very much.
Yeah.
And if you can help out, that would be great.
Yeah, please help GeorgeAnn out, folks.
Thanks, Joseph.
You're welcome.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
The Byte Show is sponsored by Deep Cello Coffee. Perhaps the best coffee on this or any other planet. The Byte Show is listener supported at thebyteshow.com.